Welcome to a battlefield of minds. Two grandmasters face off, where every move cuts like a sword. One mistake, and it's over. This isn't just chess, it's war disguised as strategy. Let's dive in, move by move, into this epic clash. WesleySo kicks off with 1, 2, A4, a blunt spear into the center. Wesley dictating tempo and daring Ronald to meet fire with measured steel as the battle drums roll. Ronald W. answers Sen Poring winning. Enten Kai. In India. As the French defense rises like a stout barricade. Ronald, inviting a slow, positional scrap, where counterpunches will decide the fate. Wesley pushes to 10, Amorizion. D4, grabbing more center space. Wesley piles pressure forward, and signals he's ready to pry open lines and make Ronald's fortress uncomfortable. Ronald replies, Torin Porensiu, Muntamuitit Sedes Penin. Antuscorner. Nuozi. Entrisi, Undae, Undesayen, Chodwinen, Anwai. D5, a direct challenge in the center. Ronald strikes back immediately, testing Wesley's nerve, and asking who will concede the first structural crack. Wesley develops 320. NC3, a flexible knight jump. Wesley increases central control and eyes the dark squares, with the cool confidence of a general probing enemy flanks. Ronald captures 3-8. Nunmus. Nini. Any. All. I. Dexifur. Ronald rips a pawn from the center, provoking complications, and saying plainly, if you want space, you'll have to fight for it. Nice. Wesley recaptures 4-13 and in a race-ish. Next Safur, knight to the fray. Wesley trades material for peace activity, and keeps the initiative burning with menacing central presence. Ronald retreats 4-test. Inanin, desiwinin. Andendinen. And in a todi di sestin, hanmobetene denisabel. And even, Ronald pulls his knight toward defense, consolidating the center and preparing to untangle while keeping an eye on tactical possibilities. Wesley plays 5 distoi, Penwooders. And if 3, another knight joins the party. Wesley harmonizes development and prepares Kingside plans while whispering threats across the board. Ronald brings 5-10. Unanio. N. F6, peace, coordination from Ronald. The knight arrives to bolster the center and challenge Wesley's growing influence with steady resilience. Wesley develops 6 tunden, Q and is fix, unubent kanime, in a 6. BD3, bishop aimed at the kingside. Wesley signals aggressive intent, eyes potential sacrifices, and readies a storming formation against Black's castle dreams. Ronald captures 6 Torin. Naniden, Inabdiandine, Intanimao, and V, Inesina, Humberway, Kentchelby. Anders Seaman, No.1. Nixafor. Ronald jumps into calculation, snatching a central knight and daring Wesley to untangle the resulting tactical web. Wesley recaptures 7. Torch tool. Bixafur. Bishop takes back boldly. Mvi. Wesley trades knights for bishops and stakes out an uncompromising central posture while opening lines for attack. Ronald plays 7. Portsea wounds. Ninden. NF6. Ronald repositions his knight to blunt threats and shore up weaknesses, trying to neutralize Wesley's bishops before sparks fly. Wesley pins with 8. Bg5. Wesley's bishop creeps in with a pin, teasing tactics and applying pressure to Ronald's fragile coordination like a smoldering fuse. Ronald answers 8. Porturen. Inanen, and Stanima, and No.1 Sumoban. Minin, Apoyan, and No.1 is enemies. Bezaven. Ronald blocks the pin, calmly, preparing to exchange and diffuse Wesley's pressure while keeping defensive structure intact. Wesley captures 9. Portois. Bxf6. Wesley sacrifices a bishop to rupture Black's pawn structure or remove a key defender. A gutsy thorn aimed straight at Ronald's camp. Ronald recaptures 9. Port ace. Kennedy. Enemo. And. Bxf6. Ronald takes back with the bishop, accepting structural or positional concessions, but keeping material even, and the game dangerously balanced. Wesley centralizes 10. Torch and Milwis, Imdan. QD3. Queen into the fray. Wesley eyes G6 and E4 squares, coordinating an impending Kingside offensive with theatrical intent. Ronald plays 10. Taut. None is so insensuous. Indangman. A6. A prophylactic pawn push from Ronald, forcing Wesley's dark-squared bishop to decide its destiny while blunting potential pins and intrusions. Wesley castles, long 11. Oh. Wesley commits to opposite side castling, cranks up attacking ambition and signals an all-out race of pawns and fire toward each king. Ronald shores up, 11. Almdi. Os. X. Ronald fortifies his center and prepares to blunt queenside infiltration, buying time and hoping to dampen Wesley's storm. Wesley advances 12. Periu. A4. A rocket of a pawn toward Black's king. Wesley begins the kingside, battering ram, intent on opening lines with relentless pressure. Ronald sidesteps 12. Pearl. Nyanya Zulu. Andon. QAZ7. Queen tucks to 7. Eyeing the A5 square and supporting central tension while keeping options open against Wesley's looming assault. Wesley storms with 13. G4. Another pawn storm from Wesley. Relentless and noisy, pushing to pry open the G-file and unleash pieces like a siege engine. Ronald checks with 13. Ent. Ornina. Kufuri. Ronald flashes a queen check. A sharp interjection meant to complicate lines and scatter Wesley's attacking timing for a heartbeat. Wesley blocks. 14. Pairs. QA3. Wesley calmly meets the check with the queen, trading central control for clarity and refusing to be rattled by Ronald's fireworks. Ronald captures. 14 10. In den Selbststeuer gewonnen, Absurdestür Mustinen. And then okay. Der already tends satisfy. Pay. In the QXE3. Ronald decides to liquidate queens, steering toward a complex middle game where pawn structure and piece activity will scream louder than heavy pieces. Wesley recaptures. 15. FC3. Pawn recapture opens the F-file and creates dynamic central pawns. Wesley accepts an altered structure in exchange for open lines and attacking chances. Ronald plays. 15. Innings. And now. G6. Ronald fortifies Kingside dark squares and tries to blunt Wesley's potential sacrifices, creating luft and aiming for a breathable defense. Wesley advances. 16. Pendio Missouri, and then, Amen, counting to 16. Give. Wesley thrusts a pawn into Black's fortress, clawing open pathways and threatening to rip apart Black's kingside with surgical intent. Ronald replies. 16. In. Estil. On direction. No nay. H5. Ronald captures on G5, opening the H-file and engaging in sharp trades that promise sparks and exposed kings. Wesley recaptures. 17. Forward penis. Taxi5. Wesley retakes with H-pawn. Military. Zeitzing a half-open H-file and turning the position into a live battlefield with mating ideas brewing. Ronald sacrifices. 17th party. Indimentia. Panabolinus tuwe, and Valupiwan, is Dinon to Clinching. And 9. Axe-hone. Ronald goes for an exchange sack on hone, ripping material into the mix to blunt Wesley's rook file and seek counterplay. Wesley answers. 18 Potean. Churones. X-hone. Wesley calmly recaptures, keeping the H-file under his control and maintaining the initiative like a gladiator wiping blood from his sword. Ronald develops. 1810. Hey. Morainenike. Amen. G7. Ronald brings a bishop to G7, eyeing central squares and trying to trade pieces to reduce Wesley's attacking potential. Wesley leaps. 19. Taught. Isteden. Nefiv. Wesley's knight charges into the center with menace, aiming at 7 and G6 squares, while escalating tactical threats around Black's king. But Ronald retreats. 19. Point. Months. Ent. Nyanan rumenage states, pendines jopen, Estiano und Erkenntnis, Anasiv. B7. Ronald pulls a bishop back to reorganize defenses, attempting to plug holes and prepare to face Wesley's mounting pressure. Wesley swings. 20 turns in. Eng4, knight to g4 with theatrical intent. Wesley eyes f6 and f5 squares, hunting for forks, pins, or a decisive crack in black's lines. Ronald strikes 22. Almanayan. A stun. a5, a central pawn thrust from Ronald, forcing complications, opening lines for his pieces, and saying he won't be overrun without a fight. Wesley invades 21, 31. Nf6, Wesley's knight jumps into the enemy camp with a check, an electrifying incursion that draws blood and forces black to answer immediate threats. Ronald captures 21, 30. Ernst. Bxfx. Ronald trades off the visiting knight, trying to steady the ship and reduce attackers while accepting a shifted material balance. Wesley recaptures 22 Totten. Gxf6. Pawn takes back aggressively, opening the g-file further and creating a passed pawn with deadly potential against Ronald's king structure. Ronald castles, long, 22. Enanen, Deniwen, and Winchanistan Edges Sestoka Rudel is Tannen. Underside. Oh, Ronald countercommets, with opposite side castling too. And now both kings face open lanes. A bona fide all-out chess war is underway. Wesley captures 23. Dxf5. Wesley snatches a central pawn, simplifying to sharpen the attack and pry more open lines for his rooks and bishops. Ronald replies 23. Indenon. Janin is Saniwandeshe. Andenen. B6. Ronald develops a bishop to a6, interposing and contesting critical central squares while trying to blunt the e-file and trade into safety. Wesley intrudes 24. Rise 7. Wesley plants a rook deep on the 7th rank, menacing pawns and pieces, turning the 7th rank into a hunting ground for Ronald's weaknesses. Ronald pushes 24. Ndasin. NC. A5. Ronald thrusts a pawn to g5 seeking counterplay, trying to close lines or generate a wedge to stall Wesley's rooks from cozying up. Wesley doubles down 25. Ag7. Wesley swings the rook across to g7 with intent, ramping up pressure on g-file targets and preparing to pry open black's fortress. Ronald replies 25. Neoena pace. Indiadine. Nobebenet holosenixforian, intersedatestant. e4. Ronald storms forward with a pawn, launching counterattacks and attempting to distract Wesley's pieces from the king hunt with chaotic activity. Wesley retreats 26. bd3. Wesley repositions his bishop to a defensive-offensive square, eyeing g6 and e-file, while keeping the rooks coordinated for the final push. Ronald centralizes 26. Istinen. Enman. Benwoden Sway. rd5. Ronald leaps a rook to d5. Z-king to block. exchange or harass white's pieces and buy breathing space amid the encroaching storm. Wesley occupies 27. RJ5, Wesley invades again with the rook, zeitzing the open file, and hinting at inevitable sacrifices or decisive penetration into black's camp. Ronald shuffles 27. Pinwinyo. Namusti. Onen. Imestilatumoniwan. In the sen. Is the Boden Nestura de Kane. Kede7. Ronald steps his king to 7. Trying to sidestep checks and coordinate his pieces for an organized, if precarious, resistance. Wesley presses 28. Portuane. B4. Pawn push to B4 from Wesley. Expanding on the queenside and preparing to pry open new fronts, while keeping Ronald reactive on multiple axes. Ronald advances 28. Nan. Nenan. Pada. Afiv. Ronald counters on the queen's side with a pawn thrust of his own, creating tension and aiming to blunt white's pawn storm before it becomes overwhelming. Wesley repositions 29. BC4. Bishop to C4 lands with surgical aim, pointing at D5 and B5 squares and increasing pressure on the sensitive dark square complex around black's king. Ronald captures 29. Enjanai. Orm. En Pebrisiorut. Axe B4. Ronald opens files by grabbing on B4, exchanging pawns and inviting tactical skirmishes that could change the whole complexion of the position. Wesley captures 32 Orin. Enviable Riston, in the Sefi captures 30 Turin. Bx5. Bishop takes on D5 with a sharp exchange. Wesley removes a defender and opens pathways, making Ronald's position feel suddenly fragile and bloody. Ronald recaptures 30. And Indian, Etienne and Neneri, Cananwa, the Salt Hangonain. BXT5. Ronald trades back with his bishop, attempting to reduce attacking forces while clinging to the last threads of defensive coherence. Wesley, Zeitzes 31, Pimde. RxD4. Wesley takes on G4 with the rook, capturing material and doubling down on the kingside assault. The noose tightens around Ronald's monarch. Ronald pushes 31. Anina, Edesium Int. C5. Ronald fires C5 to blunt the center and try to create counterplay, looking for any seam to pry the initiative away from Wesley. Wesley tucks, King 32. KB2. Wesley steps his king to B2 for safety, a measured retreat that keeps his monarch off the firing lines while his pieces swarm the enemy camp. Ronald moves 32. Istanasi. Antoine. K6. Ronald centralizes his king, oddly active in the melee, aiming to help the defense, but also exposing himself to tactical shots from Wesley's forces. Wesley advances 33. A3. Pawn to A3 from Wesley shores, up queenside squares and denies. Ronald easy forward breaks, preparing to consolidate gains before the final blow. Ronald captures 33. Pell wins 2. India Kale. En order says that pen. En Korean Mashorn. Indianen. Almodianengo. Hebawazit she. Bix a3. Ronald grabs on a3 with a pawn, blasting open files and giving checks that force White's king to make decisions under fire. Wesley recaptures 34. Kix a3. Wesley's king steps forward to take on f3, bravely claiming material and accepting a slightly exposed monarch for greater peace activity. Ronald pushes 34. Indian. Undian. b5. Pawn thrust b5. From Ronald looks to gain space and open lines of his own. A last-ditch effort to stir complications and muddy Wesley's attack. Wesley re-enters 35-dive. Rg5. Wesley's rook slides back into the fray, ready to exploit open files and coordinate with other pieces for a final decisive crescendo Turin, tennis in Morlumisea. Ronald storms 35. And at Unia. And this. b4e. Ronald charges, with b4e giving check. A sharp pawn stab that aims to harass White's king and inject unexpected life into Black's defense. Wesley sidesteps 36. Kafur. Wesley's king shuffles to a four, dancing away from checks while keeping coordination with rooks and pawns for the closing sequence. Ronald checks 36. 8. Nanowists. BG chinks. Ronald brings a bishop with check to 6, trying to complicate matters and create tactical shows of force against Wesley's centralized king. Wesley moves 37. Petticorno Bondianen. Penadais. 167. Kb3. Wesley safely tucks his king to b3. Steady and unflappable, refusing to panic as the battlefield continues to boil over. Ronald checks 37. In Nance Esiori, Well Wajan Etwa, and Esabel Costani. Nayo, Nasia, and just, bd5. Ronald's bishop gives another checking blow, seeking to force simplifications or tricky perpetuals while the clock of tension ticks loudly. Wesley calmly plays 38. c4. Pawn to c4 from Wesley, closing critical lines, cutting the bishop's scope and steering the game toward a calculated, inevitable endgame. Ronald shifts 38. And Sil. Bandy. bf3. Ronald's bishop sneaks to f3, aiming at g2 and stirring latent tactical threats while squeezing whatever counterchances remain. Wesley infiltrates 39. h8. Wesley's rook rockets to gate. A dramatic invader, aligning for mating nets or decisive material gains as Ronald's position crumbles. Ronald checks 39. Adc. Nada. Anai. Palmeye. En cs. Indicais shalmoslishishay. Indicuni. Anhai. And Sil. Bidonis. Ronald replies, with Bidonis giving a final desperate check. trying to wring complications from thin air and test Wesley's nerves. Wesley retreats 40 down. Ka b2. Wesley calmly draws his king back to b2. Maintaining composure and refusing to let Ronald's checks derail the disciplined final assault. Ronald plays 40, and so. And pistola menina witnin, kea, the bit cannot stani. B2. Ronald repositions to E2. Probing for trades or tactical swindles. But the net is tightening and options are running dangerously low. Wesley charges, 41, tat-tang. Re8. Wesley flashes Re8 with authority. Coordinating rooks, and creating decisive threats that leave Ronald's king little room to breathe. Ronald steps 41. Tesebekion and notions sister Pessy, Pindertund stale, in Wolverhampton, Tubenfire Tuine. One. Antidia. Kafif. Ronald's king tries to flee to 5. An attempt to dodge the net, but stepping into even more precarious terrain under Wesley's relentless coordination. Wesley thrusts, 42. E4, pawn E4. From Wesley shoves, open lines, and cranks up the pressure. A concrete strike that magnifies every weakness around Ronald's monarch. Ronald staggers, 42, Dian, Pendy. Yanandia J. Apapaliri. Ninana Mimo, in the pair Nissa, and the sea. Kg6. Ronald's king staggers to Gs6, seeking refuge but instead stumbling into the teeth of Wesley's pieces and the finishing sequence. Wesley delivers, 43. Our gate hit, the final thunderbolt. The rook slices through Ronald's last defenses. His king cornered with no escape. The crowd erupts as Ronald resigns. WesleySo claims a brilliant victory, ending the battle in flames and glory. The video ends here. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thank you again. Everyone, see you in the next video.